Let me say this slowly, because someone needs to hear it today. If your silence suddenly angers people, it's not because you became rude. It's because you stopped being available for disrespect. Here's the truth: no one tells you people don't hate boundaries. They hate losing control over you. And that's why this first comeback matters. Not loud, not cruel, not dramatic, just devastatingly calm. When someone pokes you, provokes you, or pushes you to react, when they want your emotional labor, your explanation, your apology, you look at them and say, I'm not available for this conversation. And then you stop talking. Do you feel that? That's power returning to your body. This sentence doesn't attack. It doesn't defend. It doesn't explain. Because confident people don't negotiate their self-respect. Here's why it shuts people up. It denies them the reward they're chasing, your emotional reaction. You're not saying they're wrong. You're not saying you're right. You're saying, I choose peace over performance. And let me be very clear, you do not owe access to people who drain you, dismiss you, or diminish you. When you say this, you're not being cold, you're being clear, and clarity feels offensive to people who benefit from your confusion. So the next time someone tries to pull you into chaos, remember this: you don't need better arguments. You need stronger boundaries. And this sentence, this is where it starts. There's a moment in every difficult conversation where someone crosses a line, not with volume, but with dismissal. They minimize your feelings. They talk over you. They tell you you're too sensitive, too emotional, too much. And right there, most people start explaining, defending, justifying their pain, but explaining is not power. So here's the comeback that stops the conversation without raising your voice. You don't get to decide what matters to me. Let that land. This sentence is not aggressive. It's self-defining. It draws a boundary around your inner world and says, this is not up for debate. Here's why it shuts people up. It removes them from a role they were never qualified for, the judge of your emotional reality. You are not asking them to agree. You are informing them of a limit. And people who thrive on invalidating others, they panic when they lose that authority. Notice what you're not doing here. You're not proving your pain. You're not giving examples. You're not convincing. Because your feelings don't need a jury. This comeback teaches a powerful lesson. Access to you requires respect. And if someone responds with sarcasm or laughter, that tells you everything you need to know about their capacity for connection. Let me say this clearly. The moment you stop arguing for your worth, you start embodying it. So the next time someone shrugs off your truth, remember, your emotions are not negotiable, and neither is your dignity. Some people don't want understanding. They want control. They ask questions that aren't questions at all. They're traps. Loaded. Designed to pull you into defending yourself until you're exhausted. And the moment you sense that, that's your cue to stop playing the game. Here's the comeback that ends it. I'm comfortable with my decision. No debate. No justification. No apology. This sentence terrifies people who rely on your self-doubt. Why? Because it removes the one opening they need, your uncertainty. You're not asking for permission. You're not inviting feedback. You're stating a fact about your inner alignment. And alignment is unshakable. Watch what happens when you say this. They'll push. They'll prod. They'll say, but don't you think? And you don't move. Because when someone is rooted in themselves, there's nothing to argue with. Here's the deeper truth: you are allowed to choose what makes sense to you, even if it makes no sense to anyone else. Especially then, this comeback shuts people up because it refuses to collapse under pressure. It says, I trust myself, and self-trust is loud, even in silence. Let me be clear about something important. People who need you to explain yourself often benefit from you not trusting yourself. So when you say this sentence, you're not being stubborn. You're being sovereign. And sovereignty doesn't argue. It stands. There are moments when someone says something so inappropriate, so invasive, so casually cruel that your body freezes before your mind catches up. And that's when people usually laugh it off, change the subject, swallow the discomfort. But silence, when it's forced, becomes self-betrayal. So here's the comeback that reclaims your power without turning you into someone you're not. That comment doesn't sit right with me. Notice how steady that is. You're not accusing. You're not attacking. You're naming your internal response. And that's what makes it impossible to argue with. This sentence shifts the energy instantly. It puts responsibility back where it belongs, on the impact, not the intent. Because intent does not erase harm. What makes this comeback so effective is its honesty. It doesn't escalate. It doesn't invite debate. It simply draws a line. And here's the truth: most people avoid. Healthy people pause when you say this. Unhealthy people get defensive. That reaction tells you everything. You are allowed to interrupt, disrespect the moment it happens. You don't need the perfect wording. You don't need permission. You need presence. This comeback shuts people up because it forces awareness, and awareness is uncomfortable for people who rely on your silence. So the next time your body says something is off, listen. Your discomfort is not weakness, it's wisdom. And honoring it, that's courage. There's a certain kind of person who keeps pushing, not because they don't understand, but because they're hoping you'll eventually give in. They repeat the question. They rephrase it. They act confused. And most people respond by over-explaining. But over-explaining is an invitation. So here's the comeback that closes the door completely. I've already answered that. Short, final, unavailable for manipulation. This sentence does something powerful. It names the pattern. It tells the other person, I see what you're doing. And once a pattern is named, it loses its power. You're not being rude. You're being clear. Clarity feels harsh to people who rely on persistence to wear you down. Here's why this shuts people up. It refuses to reward badgering with new information. You are not required to keep engaging just because someone won't accept your answer. Let me say this plainly. Repeating yourself does not make you more respectful. It makes you more exhausted. This comeback teaches people how to treat you by what you're willing to repeat and what you're not. If they push again, you don't change your tone. You don't add details. You simply pause, because boundaries don't need volume. They need consistency. And consistency is something people can't argue with. Sometimes the most aggressive behavior comes wrapped in a smile, passive comments, backhanded compliments. Well, meaning jokes that sting just enough to make you doubt yourself. And when you react, they say, relax. I was just kidding. That's the moment this comeback matters. I don't find that funny. No lecture, no emotional spill, no apology, just truth. This sentence is powerful because it refuses to collude with disrespect. It doesn't escalate. It exposes. You're not accusing them of being cruel. You're stating a boundary around what you will participate in. And that makes people deeply uncomfortable, especially those who rely on humor as a shield. Here's why it shuts people up some. It forces accountability without drama. There's nowhere to hide when the joke doesn't land. Notice how grounded this is. You're not asking them to change. You're informing them of a limit, and limits are not punishments. They're information. Let me say this clearly. You do not have to laugh to keep the peace. You do not have to minimize yourself to be likable. When you say this sentence, you're choosing self-respect over social ease. And that choice, it changes the room. Because people quickly learn you're not the one to test. There's a moment when someone isn't actually talking to you. They're talking at you. They interrupt. They dominate. They steamroll the conversation until your presence disappears. And most people either withdraw or explode. But there's a third option, a grounded one. Here's the comeback that reclaims space without creating a scene. I'm not finished speaking. That's it. No anger, no apology, no explanation. This sentence is powerful because it asserts existence. It says, I matter here, and that alone can stop someone cold. Why does it shut people up? Because it calls out disrespect in real time. Calmly, people who interrupt depend on your silence to continue. When you interrupt the interruption, the pattern breaks. Notice what you're doing here. You're not demanding dominance. You're restoring balance. This is not about being louder. It's about being present. And let me say something important. If someone reacts badly to this sentence, they were never interested in dialogue, only control, you are allowed to take up verbal space. You are allowed to complete a thought. Your voice doesn't need to be earned. It already belongs to you. And when you claim it with calm confidence, the room adjusts. Every time, some people don't want resolution. They want a reaction. They poke. They criticize. They say things just provocative enough to pull you into defending yourself. And the moment you react, they win. So here's the comeback that stops the cycle entirely. I'm not engaging with this. Feel the finality in that. You're not debating. You're not correcting. You're not convincing. You're choosing self-containment. This sentence is powerful because it names your agency. It says, I decide where my energy goes. And people who feed on conflict, they starve when you stop participating. Why does this shut people up? Because it denies them access, not just to the conversation, but to you. You're not saying they're wrong. You're saying the interaction itself is no longer worth your emotional investment. That's a different kind of authority. Let me be very clear, walking away is not weakness. Disengaging is not avoidance, it's discernment. You are allowed to opt out of conversations that cost more than they give. And when you do it calmly, without contempt, without explanation, you send a message louder than any argument. My peace is not up for negotiation. That kind of self-respect changes everything. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't to answer, it's to pause. Someone throws a sharp comment, a judgment, a subtle insult disguised as honesty, and they're waiting for reaction, your collapse. Instead, you look at them and say, that's an interesting perspective. Then you stop, no follow-up, no agreement, no rebuttal. This sentence is devastating because it refuses emotional escalation. You're not validating the content, you're acknowledging its existence. And that distinction matters. Why does this shut people up? Because it gives them nothing to push against. People who provoke want friction, they want resistance. This gives them air, and without resistance, the fire dies. Here's the deeper truth. Not every opinion deserves your nervous system. Not every comment deserves your clarity. When you respond this way, you're choosing regulation over reaction. That choice signals emotional maturity, and emotional maturity intimidates people who thrive on chaos. You're not shrinking, you're rising above. Silence after this sentence is not awkward, it's intentional. And intention is a language power understands. Let me leave you with this, knowing how to respond isn't just about winning arguments or shutting people down. It's about reclaiming your power, protecting your peace, and showing up for yourself in a world that constantly tries to chip away at your confidence. Every time you choose a smart comeback, you're sending a message, not just to them, but to yourself, that you value your voice, your feelings, and your dignity. Imagine walking into every conversation, every meeting, every interaction with a quiet confidence that says, I am seen, I am heard, I matter. That's not arrogance, that's self-respect. And the beautiful part, you don't need to raise your voice or be mean-spirited to assert yourself. The smartest comebacks are anchored in clarity, calm, and courage. They are your shield, not your sword. So as you move forward, remember this, the world will always have critics, skeptics, and people who try to put you in a box. But you have the power to respond in ways that are sharp, graceful, and unforgettable. Let your words carry weight. Let your presence command respect. And most importantly, let every comeback you give remind you that you are unshakable. Stand firm. Speak with intention. Protect your peace. And never apologize for owning your space.